and it makes me sick. So you need to understand, the people running Israel are diabolical.
Now, just a few moments ago, Donald Trump passed through here, so we had a minute to talk with him. Let's roll that tape. You can see what he had to say.
Well, I've never seen anything like it. I've seen two huge 110-story buildings that are reduced to rubble, thousands and thousands of lives. I just got to see something that I've never seen before. I have hundreds of men inside working right now, and we're bringing down another 125 in a little while, and they've never done work like this before. And they're hardworking people, but they've never seen anything like it, and they've never done work like this before. It's terrible.
Don Daly down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
It
Thanks
has
very much,
completely
Ed.
collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
And people are reporting bangs as explosions. There's no confirmation of other explosions, but certainly every government building in Washington has been closed, and the staff of these buildings have been told, look, go home. It doesn't matter how you get home, just go home. Try not to use cars because the roads are totally blocked, but go home, get away. And of course that's causing a considerable amount of confusion, not to say panic here.
Bear with us 1 second, Keith. The second tower has collapsed. The second tower has collapsed.
You've had an impact on the skyline of New York. What is it like as you see it now?
It's like a whole different skyline. It's like a whole different city and world. I cannot believe the sight of Lower Manhattan without the World Trade Center, and therefore we have to rebuild, not necessarily in that form, but we have to rebuild at least as good and maybe better.
But Lou is joining us now with an update. Lou.
Yes, with the destruction of 7 World Trade Center, we saw it collapse on TV late this afternoon. That building housed the city OEM bunker, Office of Emergency Management bunker, that was supposed to be bomb-proof. It was supposed to be the place where the city was going to direct a response to an emergency like this, and it is now in rubble.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
You know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and you know, it was horrifying. About a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that.
Engineers are not just focusing on the Twin Towers. The most disturbing structural event was not that the Twin Towers fell, but that Tower 7, ignited by flying debris, fell due to fire alone.
Building 7 was a steel frame building, and is the first steel frame building that has collapsed due to fire. The failure of the building was an implosion. It failed completely different than Towers 1 and 2, in which the floors failed first.
This is a photo taken 1 second into Building 7's collapse. Notice the crimp. If we look at other controlled demolitions, we see that they first blow one of the central columns so the building falls in on itself. If you don't do this, the building falls outward and can damage surrounding structures. Building 7 had a classic crimp or wedge. Its central column was blown out first, so it didn't structurally damage buildings just a few feet away from it.
9/11 was an inside job?
Yes, 9/11 was an inside job. It was a staged event to launch the Iraq War.
The fundamental question here is whether Saddam Hussein is in compliance and will comply with allowing these monitors, these UN inspectors, to verify that he is keeping his word and indeed dismantling any weapons of mass destruction. We will do everything that is necessary to protect Israel's national security. These are our decisions. We make them as the situation develops. It is Israel alone that makes the decisions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
And Israel's very corrupt, does a lot of horrible things.
The speech was, I think, a thorough and powerful indictment of Saddam's attempts to conceal and deceive the world, to conceal the efforts that he's making at producing weapons of mass destruction. We in Israel have known this for a long time. We've shared this intelligence with the United States, and I think that the United States has shared some of that today, and of its own intelligence with the world. Well, Israel reserves the natural right, I would say, obligation of any government to protect its citizens, and we shall know how to protect ourselves.
You know, folks always think that, well, they blew up the World Trade Centers to get the $7 billion in insurance money, or they did it to get the oil, or they did it to be able to invade the Middle East, or they did it for weapon sales, or they did it for opium, or they did it for Israel.
But particularly in the Middle East, millions of people believe Israeli agents were involved in the attack. And they claim there is a basis for their suspicions. Moments after the planes hit the World Trade Center, eyewitnesses reported seeing a group of young men apparently celebrating.
My binoculars, and I could see the towers from my window. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van park. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me. You know, they didn't look shocked.
And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives has anything to do with other events today is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the 2 suspects and they're questioning them as we speak.
I just happened to see the van and, hollered over to my lieutenant. I think that could be the van. We checked it out and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
Over 2 months of interrogation began. The FBI discovered the men weren't from Al-Qaeda. They were Israelis. An enduring conspiracy theory began, that they were Israeli field agents who'd uncovered the 9/11 plot in advance. Israel had deliberately failed to warn the US authorities because it wanted to ensure that American public opinion was hostile to the Arab world. A passerby took these photos of the police searching the van. 5 men were inside it. Some had dual nationalities and were carrying more than 1 passport. Others had flight tickets to leave the US within days. Fearing robbery, one had over $4,000 hidden in a sock. Their boss at Urban Moving, Dominic Suter, was questioned by the FBI, but then disappeared back to Israel. It left lots of unanswered questions and fueled suspicion about the 5 men. Investigators seized the firm's computers, and the investigation took on a new urgency with multiple lie detector tests.
They continued to ask, did you know the terrorists? Did you know where they flew from? Did you know what they were supposed to do? And the answer all the time is no, I don't know even what you talk about.
The FBI wasn't satisfied. Channel 4 has learned from intelligence sources that some of the men's names were already known to American counterintelligence. Paul Kurtzberg admitted serving in an Israeli army anti-terrorist unit. He refused to take a lie detector test for 10 weeks.
I was serving in a special unit in the army, and it's not a big secret or something like that. But there are things that I have to keep to myself as loyal to my country.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
Smoking guns. There's over 500. You can type in the smoking guns of 9/11. You'll see different compilations, some 500, some 300, some 100. There, over 300 of them are absolutely iron-tight proof that the official story is a fable and that inside job is the only explanation.
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site other than the spot at Church and Day to which we were deployed.
Is it not enough that Israel had fingerprints all over 9/11?
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. There is no indication that the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks, but investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 9/11 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Beyond the 60 apprehended or detained and many deported since September 11th, another group of 140 Israeli individuals have been arrested and detained in this year in what government documents describe as, quote, an organized intelligence gathering operation designed to, quote, penetrate government facilities. Most of those individuals said they had served in the Israeli military, which is compulsory there, but they also had, most of them, intelligence expertise and either worked for Amdocs or other companies in Israel that specialize in wiretapping. Earlier this week, the Israeli embassy here in Washington denied any spying against or in the United States.
Israel has engaged in intelligence gathering in friendly countries. Some of it is done with permission, and some of it probably has been done without permission in areas that is vital to Israeli interest.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, we're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq.
Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and/or explosive ordnance units. Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally. A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, the Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target. The document concludes, quote, Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives. A spokesman for the the Israeli embassy here in Washington issued a categorical denial, saying any suggestion that Israelis are spying in or on the U.S. is, quote, simply not true. There are other things to consider, and in the days ahead, we will take a look at the U.S. phone system and law enforcement's methods for wiretaps, and an investigation into the possibility that both have been compromised by our friends and allies overseas. Brett?
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected. None of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote.
That Israelis who worked at the World Trade Center were warned by the Israeli government to take the day off on 9/11.
And also the alleged art student spying, which was rounded up in 2002. And they, again, were supposedly Israeli Mossad agents. Now, both of these spyrings weren't prosecuted. And in fact, the stories have been quietly removed from things like Fox News websites and things. And the spies, or alleged spies, were just quietly deported back to Israel. There was no political hoo-ha. There was no media hooha.
The United States is committed to Israel's security. We are committed to that special bond.
And this, of course, started under Bush, but is accelerated under Obama. So we see this congruent passing of the baton here. Literally no difference, just differences in the rhetoric.
We assembled here today are issuing a new decree to be heard in every city, in every foreign capital, and in every hall of power. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
Because if Donald Trump was an insider, he would have known there was a stand down that day and that Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11 with criminal elements of our government. He would have gone along with the official story, but he didn't. He was there day one saying what I was saying on the radio at the exact same time. And one great byproduct of people digging through Donald Trump's past trying to find dirt is they're pulling up all this incredible information that shows us how independent he is. Donald Trump saw what thousands of engineers years later talked about. The fact that the building clearly had bombs in it. Remember on the campaign trail, he raised Jeb Bush and the Carlyle Group and Bush Sr. and George W. and the 9/11 stand down and the 28 pages. That's why Donald Trump's so real. That's why Donald Trump is so amazing. I've been told by people that have known him for 40 plus years that Donald Trump is aware of the entire program. And has basically just been waiting for the American people to wake up so the time was right to restore this republic. But I want to go ahead and play this video for you right now from 15 years ago on 9/11 with the #1 Fox affiliate in New York and New Jersey, WWOR, with Donald Trump. Think about this. Big modern steel buildings have never fallen from fire. They never have fallen. In fact, insurance states they can't, but on 9/11, 3 buildings, including Building 7, fell. Now, let's get in the time machine and go back to this newly discovered video that's spreading across the web virally of Donald Trump talking about bombs in the World Trade Center.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was an architectural defect. You know, the World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation, and it withstood that. And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid, and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building. If you know anything about structure, it was one of the first buildings that was built from the outside. The steel, the reason the World Trade Center had such narrow windows is that in between all the windows you had the steel on the outside. So you had the steel on the outside of the building. That's why when I first looked, and you had big, heavy I-beams, when I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. And this is steel that was, you remember the width of the windows in the World Trade Center, folks. I think you know, if you were ever up there, they were quite narrow. And in between was this heavy steel. I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747 or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. Most buildings are built with the steel is on the inside around the elevator shaft. This one was built from the outside, which is the strongest structure you can have, and it was almost just like a can of soup.
You know, Donald, we were looking at pictures all morning long of that plane coming into building number 2, and when you see that approach the far side, and then all of a sudden, within a matter of a millisecond, the explosion pops out the other side.
Right.
You are vindicated. This has got to be the 50th time the last 6 months on the radical Muslims celebrating, not just in New Jersey, but New York, Palestine, all over. What do you have to say? They're still attacking you, though we've got Dan Rather on video. We've got New York Post. We've got Washington Post. We've got, I mean, what's going on here?
Well, I took a lot of heat, and I was very strong on it, and I held my line, and then all of a sudden, you know, hundreds of people were calling up my office. I was the other day in Sarasota, Florida, and people are online, and we had 12,000 people, which is fantastic. And the people were saying, many of the people from New Jersey, 4 or 5 people said, Mr. Trump, I saw it myself. I was there. They talked about Patterson, but they said, I saw it myself, Mr. Trump. I was there. So many people have called in, and on Twitter, @RealDonaldTrump, they're all tweeting. So I knew it happened, and I held my line, and people wanted me to apologize, and we can't do that. People like you and I can't do that so easily. Now, we can do it if we're wrong, Alex. You apologize. I'd apologize if I was wrong. But they were celebrating, and they were celebrating the fall of the World Trade Center. I think that's disgraceful.
It is. I mean, totally compromised. I mean, this is bizarre.
I watched when the World Trade Center came tumbling down. And I watched in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands and thousands of people were cheering as that building was coming down. Thousands of people were cheering.
This didn't happen in New Jersey. There were plenty of reports, and you're feeding a stereotype.
Chuck, it did happen in New Jersey. I have hundreds of people that agree with me.
Your words matter.
This
Truthfulness matters. Fact-based stuff matters.
Chuck, take it easy, Chuck. Just play cool.
In 2001, weeks after the attacks on New York City, and on Washington, and frankly, the attacks on all of us. Attacks that perpetrated, and they were perpetrated by the Islamic fundamentalists. Mayor Rudy Giuliani visited Israel to show solidarity with terror victims. I sent my plane because I backed the mission for Israel 100%.
But to talk about 9/11 is to talk about myself, because I've been in this since the very beginning. The public can't handle the full truth of 9/11 because it's not all sussed out and we don't know all the exact details. But we know there was a stand down. We know Saudi Arabia ran it. We know that we then attacked Iraq, arch enemies with them, and that was a war crime.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. There is a new age, something new is happening.
My name is Donald Trump, and I'm a big fan of Israel. And frankly, a strong prime minister is a strong Israel. And you truly have a great prime minister. In Benjamin Netanyahu, there's nobody like him. He's a winner. He's highly respected. He's highly thought of by all.
President-elect Trump, my friend, congratulations on being elected President of the United States of America. You are a great friend of Israel. Over the years, you've expressed your support consistently, and I deeply appreciate it.
Larry Silverstein is a great guy. He's a good guy. He's a friend of mine. Larry Silverstein is a great guy. He's a good guy. He's a friend of mine. And now people are seeing that. They're saying, you know, Trump predicted Osama bin Laden, which actually is true. And then 2 years later, a year and a half later, he knocked down the World Trade Center. And I talked about terrorism, and that was before terrorism as we know it today. I said, we better be careful. That's going to happen. It's going to be a big thing, and it certainly is a big thing.
What is the Washington Post still not reporting on this story, Alex Jones?
Well, I mean, it's like a month and a half ago, the Washington Post in its Spy Talk section admitted that the bin Laden video that we'd been shown so many times was a CIA fake, and that it was a CIA actor playing the part of Osama bin Laden. But going back 8 years ago, I could look at that video and tell that the guy's nose was twice the size. He'd suddenly gained 100 pounds. They separately had linguists in France and in Canada who went over the voice and said that it wasn't Osama bin Laden. They had experts that did the voice key test and discovered that it wasn't bin Laden. So it was common sense. I knew that wasn't bin Laden 8 years ago. But now the Washington Post comes out and throws it in our face that it wasn't bin Laden. But it was still the patriotic duty of the government and the CIA to put out a fake bin Laden video so they could scare everybody into attacking Afghanistan and Iraq.
I want to play this Hillary clip where she said that I say 9/11 is an inside job. What I said was the Saudi Arabians, the globalists, are basically funding radical. They're letting these attacks take place. They're using that to take our rights. That was in the news at the time. And translate that over that I'm saying George Bush had a plunger like Wile E. Coyote blowing the building up.
9/11 was an inside job! 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 9/11 was an inside job!
It's bad. On its face, it's wrong. On its face, it stinks to high heaven. And in Harats, in the Jerusalem Post, in the agency French press, these are the headlines. Obama's choice for chief of staff puts Israel's man in the White House. And that's the headline in Israel. You know, we run the White House. We've got the White House. I mean, but then as an American citizen, I'm not supposed to mention that. I'm supposed to just sit down and shut up and go along with that.
God bless you. Thank you, brother. Thank you. God bless you guys. Can you guys sing again?
Can you guys sing again?
Is it not enough that Israel had fingerprints all over 9/11?